So you love to dive deep into study. If that sounds like you, you've probably felt a really profound paradox at the very heart of your learning journey. It's this constant pulling tension between wanting to just lock yourself away in a room with your books and the deeply ingrained human need for actual connection. Today, in our explainer of the source material, we are exploring the very delicate balance required for a truly intellectual and spiritual life. We're going to talk about how to cultivate your mind without losing your soul, your friends, or your grounding in everyday reality.
Here's our roadmap for the explainer. We'll be covering 1. The inevitability of solitary time. 2. The danger of excessive isolation. 3. The indispensability of companions. 4. The dual nature of wealth and poverty. And finally, 5. Living on the royal road. Section 1. The inevitability of solitary time.
To kick things off, let's acknowledge a basic truth about seeking an intellectual life. It inherently requires a certain degree of profound loneliness. And honestly, you probably crave that quiet, solitary study. Why? Because interacting with people from 2,000 years ago through texts is by definition a solitary time. Think about it. When you're reading in the dead of night, or maybe in the early hours of the morning, you actively have to step out of the current moment to grasp those universal truths. You simply cannot do deep, heavy cognitive work while you're constantly surrounded by the noise and chatter of the crowd.
But here is the crucial takeaway. That solitude, it isn't actually empty. Not at all. When you sit down with really profound texts, you are communing with history's absolute greatest philosophical and spiritual figures. You're talking to the Buddha, to Socrates, to Jesus Christ, all from thousands of years ago. It's like you're standing in a crowded room of historical giants. And reaching that level of spiritual and intellectual engagement just requires you to temporarily isolate yourself from the immediate physical world around you.
Section 2. The danger of excessive isolation.
Okay, let's dive into this next part, because while solitude is absolutely the breeding ground for intellect, what happens when you completely sever your ties with the real world? Well, Chapter 7 of our source text highlights the incredibly difficult balance between intellectual life and human relations. The warning here is pretty stark. Absolute isolation can literally lead to a sick mind. If you find yourself entirely disconnected from the common sense of everyday society, you become incredibly vulnerable.
To explain this, the text introduces a really fascinating concept known as Jado-Kei, which translates to the evil path. It describes an abnormal state of mind caused by unchecked isolation. Think of a brilliant mind like a giant hot air balloon. Solitude and deep thought, that's the hot air that makes it rise beautifully into the sky. But human connection, that's your tether. Without that tether, the balloon just floats off unchecked into dangerous, unpredictable atmospheric conditions. In complete isolation, an intellectual might actually start receiving dangerous spiritual inspirations or fall into an abnormal mental state, mistaking pure madness for genius.
So, how on earth do you protect yourself from that? Your very first line of defense, your shield essentially, is a thoroughly trained brain, strong willpower, and a steady diet of substantial, mentally challenging books. Consistently reading profound literature builds up this incredible endurance and stability in your intellect. It acts like a filter against those bizarre or abnormal inspirations. But as you might guess, internal mental fortitude is really only half the battle.
Section 3. The indispensability of companions.
To truly thrive, the isolated intellectual requires a solid bridge back to everyday reality. If you look at the completely isolated solitary scholar, they are highly vulnerable to that evil path we just discussed. But the grounded intellectual, they do that exact same deep reading, but they stay tethered by what the text calls Dharma friends, intellectual peers who truly understand the specific path they are on. These friends actually protect the scholar through deep, stabilizing conversation. They keep each other balanced and grounded. And the source text actually goes even further here, focusing really heavily on the home environment. It emphasizes a huge difference between being merely clever, having great grades or a bunch of academic degrees, and being truly wise. True wisdom in a partner is all about insight, capacity, and crucially, how they handle human relationships. It's about how they treat their parents, their coworkers, and, of course, their spouse. In fact, the text explicitly notes that finding a life partner who fundamentally understands your intellectual pursuits is vital. An understanding spouse, one who can genuinely engage in deep conversation and completely comprehend the lonely nature of your work, serves as the ultimate comfort and grounding force. They are literally the strongest tether keeping that hot air balloon safely connected to Earth.
Section 4. The dual nature of wealth and poverty.
Now, what's really interesting about this next framework is how we apply this philosophy of balance to a very gritty material reality. I'm talking about money. Does wealth actually help or hinder the intellectual life? Well, the source reveals this brilliant matrix, showing that neither wealth nor poverty is inherently good or bad for the intellect. They both have right and wrong paths. Both circumstances have a royal road, which is a positive path of growth, and an evil road, a negative path of ruin. If you're wealthy, the royal road means using your money to buy time so you can study, travel, and deepen your culture. But if you aren't careful, that same wealth can quickly lead you down the evil road.
The text gives a super sharp example of this negative path. It talks about people with money or power who just become lazy. For instance, authoritarian figures who essentially just pay university professors to write their theses for them, just so they can publish it under their own names. That right there is the evil road of wealth. It's using your resources to fake intellectual achievement without ever actually doing the inner work. Ultimately, it just hollows out your mind.
On the flip side, poverty has its own royal road. The source shares this incredibly moving anecdote about a student or a young worker with barely any money to their name. They really want this sweater that costs 1,600 yen, but instead of buying it, they scrape that money together, completely sacrifice their own comfort, and buy a single profound book. And because that book cost them so dearly, they read it with fierce intensity. They absorb every single word. That restriction, that material hardship, actually creates a purer, far more focused intellectual experience.
Section 5. Living the Royal Road. Whether you're navigating the lonely heights of ancient philosophy, searching for a partner who truly gets you, or just figuring out how to balance your budget for your next stack of books, walking this path takes immense, incredible dedication. But our source text offers this really beautiful encouragement. It says that when someone sacrifices their comfort, like giving up that 1,600 yen sweater just to grow their mind, the unseen forces of the heavenly realm look down, shed tears of joy, and cheer them on. Even when your intellectual journey feels isolating or demands strict material discipline, you are entirely supported by a higher spiritual reality as long as your motives are pure.
The mind absolutely needs to soar into solitude to learn, but it just as crucially must be anchored to reality through wise companions and balanced living. So, I want you to take a moment to reflect today. Who is the anchor for your intellectual journey? Is it a Dharma friend? Is it an understanding partner? Ensure your own hot air balloon is safely tethered. Keep learning, keep connecting, and I'll see you next time.